Hello, I'm Melissa Shepard, and I'm a technical architect here to present to you today my solution for Global Adventure Tours. A bit about Global Adventure Tours is that they are a company that specializes in booking and organizing adventure-based tours. They're an organization that matches adventure seekers with boutique tour operators and guides across the world. And they operate in different geographies such as Australia, Asia, Europe, Africa, Middle East, North America, and Latin America. And they work with over 500 tour operators worldwide and anticipate over 300,000 adventurers within the first year. Some of the project goals and requirements that we're going to consolidate onto a single Salesforce org. We'll go through an evaluation of which current org most closely aligns with global standardized processes and config that supports desired future state. We'll also have the addition of Service Cloud into the selected org. And due to rapid growth, Global Adventure Tours would like to use Salesforce and other technology to automate and enhance the processes. We'll implement a scalable and flexible API-led integration approach and platform architecture to support future growth by acquisition. And we'll retire the current tour management system, which is currently end of life and no longer supported by its vendor. We'll take a phased MVP approach by region, starting with the US first. Some risks and assumptions are that there's an existing sales org that has similar processes to desired global processes in order to consolidate. Payment Force can support hosted payments using HTTPS for customers to make payments for bookings. Multiple local currencies are needed to be supported for customers and operators. Payment Force can support an HTTP-based REST API for backend integration. Service Pro supports REST for dispatch when cases are created, and some user volumes have been estimated to determine files and data storage. Some risks are that we need to migrate from multiple systems, reliance on SIs and independent contractors. Changes to Payment Force need to go through rigorous testing, and each region currently has distinct business processes. There are frictions and escalations on US being the priority, and history of bad deliverables, and major changes to its application are restricted only once a quarter. Some strategies that we'll use are a single org strategy. We're going to unify global processes, which is part of the desire to standardize their processes, which makes it easier to achieve when consolidating to a single org. We'll reuse an existing org with similar business processes and configuration, and we'll build on top of that to get to the end state, which will reduce the scope of work, faster time to market, and less data to migrate, create a shorter cutover period time. This will be a lower risk for adoption since some of the users are already using an org and are familiar with Salesforce and also can help to train others. We'll have a 360-degree view of the customer. It'll be easier for collaboration, less complex integration architecture, and this will also support a global service team. I don't see any data residency or complex compliance requirements, and we'll support this through page layouts, prototypes, sales and support processes with pick lists, visual flows. We'll have a more complex security model. We'll have to control visibility of record types and fields through profiles and permission sets. And then we'll use principle of least privilege for data access and OWD. We can have delegated admins per region with one super admin to oversee the org. And we'll have governance for all the different business processes and maximize the use of existing code and declared functionality. We'll have oversight by the Architecture Review Board and Change Review Board, and the standards defined by the Center of Excellence. Considerations for starting with multi-org is that we have to define the desired future state and consolidate a data model, determine which org is most similar will be the surviving org, and migrate metadata from retiring orgs and use a tool such as Flowsum. We'll have ETL to migrate data from retiring orgs. We'll also have multi-language, multi-currency. They're a global company with multiple regions, so they want their sites, pages, and correspondence to be in local languages of the user. We'll use Translation Workbench. We'll export community navigation and re-import translated. We'll have a language selection in the experience site for the users, and we'll make use of Visualforce email templates, which are less complex than having multiple Lightning templates. We'll also enable multi-currency, which can be set on the records. For identity, for internal, we'll use Okta with AD. We'll have an SSO configuration for that. We'll sync the users between Okta and AD using ETL. For external, we'll have tour operators using Okta with LDAP. That's another SSO configuration. And for adventurers, they'll use Facebook, Twitter, Google+. So we'll have 3 auth providers with registration handlers. For mobile, the internal users will use Salesforce One. External will use Mobile Publisher. I considered custom and native apps, but didn't see requirements such as full offline capabilities, pixel perfect UI, and these 2 apps will be faster time to market and total lower cost of ownership. For document management, we can use Salesforce files. I estimate we'll have about 1,000 gigabytes of storage. And for archival, when we archive our data, we're going to want to archive files. We use Amazon S3 buckets. So for reporting, I propose Tableau CRM, which can report on historical archive data. And for our on-platform, they can make use of standard reports. Some add-ons in App Exchange or digital engagement for chat, Flowsum for metadata migration, DocuSign, DocGen, and e-signature, and then Otisava for backup and restore. This is how I came to my files calculation. So about 500 licenses and then 2 gigabytes per license for files. So that's how I came to about 1,000 gigs with the default 10 gigabytes. The actors and licenses or tour operator coordinators are going to have a sales license. They need CRM capabilities, and they'll be managing the tour operators. Adventure specialists, they'll have sales cloud license. They're going to be using CRM, also dealing with tour proposals, and they'll have lead assignment using omnichannel. Service coordinators will be using a service cloud license. They'll be dealing with cases, digital engagement with chat, and also omnichannel. And then we have the regional managers, which are going to oversee the adventure specialists and the tour operator coordinators. For external, we have tour operator office managers, going to give them customer community plus. They'll be managing tours and schedules. They'll be creating schedules. They need delegated admin, also the ability to run reports. Tour operator staff, they're just going to have customer community with experience site access. Local tour guides are going to need customer community plus. They will provide support for tours, also need access to chatter groups and advanced sharing, and they'll also be in the same community as the adventure seekers, which the adventure seekers are customer community, and they're going to be logging into book and pay for their tours. There's the role hierarchy that's going to support our data visibility within the org. So we have a CEO, a regional VP per region, then we have regional managers. Tour operator coordinators will be reporting to the regional managers. Tour operator managers will be reporting to the tour operator coordinators as well as the tour guides. And then we have adventure specialists. And then we'll have global service director with service coordinators. So next to the system landscape, we have Facebook, Twitter, and Google as our social providers. So that's going to be using OpenID Connect, have user agent for the mobile publisher app, along with OpenID Connect, and then Salesforce One Mobile for the internal users that will use user agent with SAML. So we have two experience sites, one for the tour operators and another one for the guides and the adventurers, since they'll need to collaborate in chat using Chatter. I'm proposing Okta as our IDP, so this will provide SP-initiated deep linking. We'll use Relay State for redirecting the user to the app, and then we'll have to bring in our IDP certificate to our SSO settings, which I mentioned we'll have multiple, and this provides for SAML SSO. We'll bring in an ESB for a real-time event-driven API integration layer. It also provides automatic retries, error handling. It can do orchestration between multiple systems for us, as well as protocol conversion for things like OData 4.0. It provides a decoupled integration architecture and a scalable and flexible integration layer. We'll then use ETL for our large data loading and our archival extracting and transforming. So this is more for like bulk data loads and addition, IDL for our data migration. We'll secure both of these connections using bearer token and mutual TLS, and Salesforce will be the org enforcing the mutual TLS. I'm proposing that we use Amazon for data warehouse and S3 buckets for files. So that will be archived using our ETL. We do have some regional sales orgs that is part of a phased approach. We'll be retiring those orgs and bringing the data into Salesforce and getting those regions onto Salesforce. So we'll start with one org for the US, and then our end state will be all regions operating on the same org to achieve that global unified process. We are going to be retiring the tour management system, so that has EDI interfaces and is built on .NET. So we'll be migrating data from there, and I'll go more into our data migration later. And also Okta is going to have to connect to both LDAP and AD behind the firewall. So we have LDAP and AD agents that will run on specific ports. There's also payment for us, which will use an HTTPS URL redirect for customers to pay for their bookings. And then we'll also be integrating on the back end using a REST API. There's also service part, which we'll need to integrate with, assuming there's a REST API there. And then there's also tour operator systems. So we'll provide an external API gateway. And then I'm assuming that the ESB is going to have a Salesforce connector where we can make use of the streaming API and connect using Comet D and the Bayou protocol. And it can also make remote call-ins using the REST API. Next, I'll go over the data model. So I'm proposing an account and contact for the tour operators, but then person accounts for the adventurers, and we'll have a private account model. We'll also have orders that will be controlled by parent. These are the tour bookings for adventurers to book the tours. This is an object where I identified LDV. We'll also have cases that the adventurers can book when they are on a tour and they have an issue, or if they have any issues before their tour. We'll use leads as applications for the tour operators that want to be enrolled to be able to provide tours for Global Adventure Tours. Next, we'll have the actual tours that the tour operators will be setting up, and then they'll have specific schedules for each of those tours, which can be booked against by the adventurers. And then we also have to keep track of the tour guides that are booked per tour. I have some external objects where we'll be archiving the data to these external objects, then we can query this data for historical purposes. So we'll need both the tour schedule and the tour to be archived along with the order, and then we'll have a lookup to the account of who booked the tour. These are the volumes that I estimated for the objects, and the tour booking is where I identified the large data volume. So the impacts of large data volumes, they can have impact on CRUD operations, which can slow down. For this, we can have more asynchronous processing. So if we do need to update any related objects to orders, we can use something such as platform events to fire, and then the other related objects can be processed in a asynchronous fashion. Also, LDB can affect overall system performance and also affect read operations such as searches, list views, reports, and page load times. Also can cause CPU timeouts, and sharing calculations can slow down and cause record locking. So some of the short and long-term mitigation strategies are, I'm proposing a system owner that's not in the role hierarchy to prevent locking from sharing calculations for the order. We can also use the query plan tool. It will determine what indexes we can use, such as order number, order name, start date, or lookup to account for reporting list views. And then if we need to, we can create custom indexes with Salesforce, but we have to keep in mind that the selectivity threshold is going to be a lot lower. It's only 10% of the first million, with 5% after that, up to a total of 1 million. So we get a better performance on our standard index fields. Long-term is we're going to archive to the data warehouse when the tour dates are complete, along with the tour schedule and the tour header record. And they'll bring this data back in as an external object. Next is some business process. So the first part is the tour operator management. So the tour operators are going to be applying to be tour operators. So we'll have a lead for an online application, have a visual flow and a guest community page for lead capture. I did consider it web to lead, but that won't support uploading of documents because it does mention that they would like to support capture supporting documentation, including certificates and references. These files are usually 10 megabytes in size, so we can store these as files against the application because we have a 2 gigabyte limit there. Also, if they do need to email anything in, we can use email services for sending these documents and attaching to the records. They also would like to be able to collaborate with each other on these registration requests, so we can use manual sharing on the lead to share to any other TOCs that need to collaborate. And then we can use Chatter for communication on the record. Once the documents are verified, there is a registration score. So it's calculated based on things such as size and revenue, risk level of tours, and number of injuries and fatalities. We could use Einstein lead scoring here. And it mentions that the leads need to be assigned on a round robin basis. So we can use an app exchange app such as Ringlead to assign leads round robin, which gives us out of the box functionality and scalability. It does mention that if their score is greater than 50, an adventure specialist needs to be notified to perform a local visit. So we could assign to a queue for the adventure specialist. We can use omnichannel skills-based routing here. Leads are supported with omnichannel because it mentions that they need to assign based on skill and capacity, which omnichannel supports. Once the lead is assigned to an adventure specialist, they'll be requesting a visit. So they'll send an email from the application record using Visualforce email template for it to be translated, and then they'll create an event for the on-site visit. Once they're on site, they need to either approve or cancel the registration, so they can use the Salesforce One mobile app here. And they'll need to make sure they cache their records before they go on site for access in case they lose any connectivity. And then we can give them quick actions to either approve or cancel from the application record. And then if the score is less than 50 or has a completed follow-up, they'll verify and submit for approval. So we can just use an out-of-the-box approval process here. And then once approved, the tour operator coordinator onboards the tour operator. So this is when they're going to do a lead conversion to create the account and contact. And then they'll be onboarded to the experience site where they'll receive email for logging in and setting their password from Okta. This also should create a letter in their local language. So we can have a record trigger flow using a translated Visualforce email template. We can just send an email here. We also could use our document management and a template with DocuSign DocGen to create a document that's attached to the account record. Also, the tour operator coordinator will be the account owner. Next, the tour operator and its contacts need to be set up in Paymentforce, and a creditor ID needs to be stored back on their account records. So we have an integration here. Salesforce will be calling the ESB through a remote process invocation, fire and forget platform event. I'm assuming we can just use an platform event here. It can be asynchronous because we don't need an immediate response for the user, and we'll create the tour operator account in Paymentforce. And then when that creditor ID is received back, the ESB will make a remote call in via RS back to Salesforce and update the tour operator account with that creditor ID. Next is tour proposal and scheduling. So approved tour operators will request a proposed tour and set tour dates. So they'll log into the experience site and then create a new tour and a draft status. I considered using products and price books, but the tour pricing is set by the tour operator, not by Global Adventure Tours. So it's not their own pricing, and product can't be a child in a master detail relationship. Also, it's hard to control the sharing on products between all the different tour operators. So that's why I proposed custom objects. The proposed tours go through a process of proposal and negotiation. We can just use Chatter for the negotiation modifications on the tour proposal. I did also consider quotes here, but I didn't feel that opportunities were justified, and we need opportunities to be able to use quotes. So they could just negotiate and keep track on their tour record. They also need to set a maximum capacity in each tour. So we'll have to keep, and also they'll create a 12-month schedule. So the 12-month schedule will be tracked through the tour schedules. And then the adventure specialist for the region can review the proposed tour and the schedule. And then they're going to have to find tour guides that can be responsible locally for these different tours. So the tour will be assigned to the adventure specialist per region by queues, and then the tour schedule will be a master detail lookup to tour. That's how they'll get access to this tour schedule. And then the tour guide will be assigned using a custom flow to find the available tour guides in that local region. And we can use a social distance queries to query for their location. And then the tour schedule will be shared to the tour guides using a sharing set using the user contact equals the tour schedule, tour guide lookup. And the proposed system should automatically check that tour guides are not double booked. So we'll just have to build logic using invocable Apex for the flow to call for checking their availability. Then they needed to create a pre-formatted PDF that displays the tour schedule's information. This is where we can use DocuSign to create a PDF and attach it to the tour with the scheduled dates using a template. And then once the adventure specialist has completed their review, the creditor's account is debited in Paymentforce with an amount that is set regionally. So we can have these regional amounts set in a custom metadata, which can be modified by admins. We don't want everyone being able to modify this information. So then the tour will be changed to a status of ready for payment. We can use a record trigger flow that will create a platform event and then fire this off to the ESB. So this will be a request reply platform event. I mean, sorry, no, that's not what this is actually a request reply because we do actually need a response to the user. So this will be a synchronous integration, and the request to Paymentforce will be made to debit the tour operator account, and then we'll send the creditor ID and fee amount to Paymentforce, and then we'll receive back a response immediately for the user to let them know if it was actually successful or not. And then an email notification is sent to the tour operator with the tour details and the schedule. So we'll have a record trigger flow of the tour with an email action for when the status is published. So that's when the tour is going to be visible to external users to actually book against. And then the tour operator can mark the tour to auto renew each year. We'll just have a checkbox on the tour. And then this is another integration point that will happen. So when the tour does need to renew, we'll have the ESB will be calling into Salesforce using remote call-in, a scheduled job to check daily for any renewals. And when it does find any that need to be renewed, ESB will call Paymentforce using a request for remote process invocation request reply pattern. We'll send the request to Paymentforce and receive back a success or failure, because if we do receive back success, we're going to have to update. The tour operator system, and then send a response back to Salesforce. If it's not successful, the tour operator system should not be updated, and that's why we need the request reply pattern between the ESB and Paymentforce. So if it is successful, the tour status will be updated to renewed by the ESB, And then we'll have a record triggered flow on the tour to copy the old tour dates to new tour dates. And then that's when we'll send the update to the tour operator system that it was successfully renewed. If not successful, the tour status will be updated to needs review. And then we can have a record triggered flow to send an email notification. Next is the adventure request. So this is where the adventurers will log into the experience site, or using the mobile publisher mobile app. We'll have a Lightning web component with an Apex controller that runs without sharing for a custom search on all the available tours that they can book against. And then we'll filter the tours with a published status. Then they can select which tour they want to book against in this custom Lightning web component. And then it will also show a map when they do select a tour. Actually, it's a map of all the tours that are upcoming. So we can use Google Maps within a Lightning web component in iframe. And we'll grab the tour location coordinates, which we'll have to store on the tour record, and then display those on the map using the latitude and longitude coordinates. Next, they also can request that the system suggest tours to them based on the types and number of tours that they've booked in the past 5 years. So we can just display these recommendations when they log into the experience site using a Lightning web component and also an Apex controller that will query external objects without sharing and perform logic for any suggestions based on the historical data that's been archived. And then the adventurer can make a booking for a particular tour date. Once they decide which tour they want to book, they'll create their booking, which is going to be our order. And then there'll be a hosted HTTPS URL redirect to the hosted payment page for Payment Force. This is where we're going to send URL parameters to the hosted page with the customer ID, payment amount, and we'll receive, and also we'll have to send the merchant ID. Actually, if it's our own system, that doesn't, we only need to send the customer ID and payment amount. So they'll receive back the payment transaction or failure and then store the payment transaction on the order record. The system should prevent bookings if the capacity for the tour is exceeded. So each time the order is placed, we'll have to update a current count on the tour schedule. And then when the limit is reached, this tour schedule will equal closed and those won't show up to be booked against in the search. And then they also need to make, the tour operators can make bookings in their own systems. So this should update Global Adventure Tours systems to reflect the current capacity. So when a tour is booked to the tour operator system, they'll call the external API gateway using HTTPS and OAuth, such as the web server flow, and updates will be sent via an external gateway. And then the ESB will make a remote call into Salesforce to update the count on the tour schedule. Then the ESB can get the total current count and send this back to the tour operator system using a remote process invocation so they can see the current bookings. Next, if the adventurer has booked a high-risk tour and has a medical condition, they need to sign a waiver. So we can use DocuSign, DocGen, and e-signature to send this to them to sign before they embark on the tour. The last part of our process is the adventurer support. So once adventurers have confirmed they're ready, they're supported by the tour guide that gets assigned to those tour dates. So the adventurer can post questions and get responses from the public. And they can also post photos and make comments. So this is where they can use chatter groups. And this is why we have to have both the tour operators, the tour guides and the adventurers in the same community so that they can chatter with each other on the same chatter groups. At times, the adventurers will get into trouble and require assistance. So this is where they will need to create a case. They can create this from their mobile device. They'll just have a quick action to create a case. And then this will be assigned to a pool of service coordinators. So that's based on region and the nature of their request. So we can have different queues set up per region. The case assignment rules will be based on the request type. And then there'll be an email on the case assignment with a link in the email for the service coordinator to be notified and click on the case record so they can start working on it. And then they'll be accepting the case and accepting ownership. So if they don't accept the request within 1 day, the regional manager is notified. So with critical priority cases, they must be reminded every 4 hours until they accept the case. We can use case escalation rules here. And then there are SLAs based on any medical conditions for the adventurers. So any cases, there's certain cases have a 14-day window for resolution. Some have a 5-day window. We can just set an SLA based on the account field for their any medical conditions. Then updates to the request need to be integrated to the field dispatch system in real time. So I'm assuming here a near real time platform event will be sufficient for this. So Salesforce will make a call to the ESB, which will then send a request to Service Pro when this case is created. So it will be remote process invocation, fire and forget platform event. This will be asynchronous. And then if someone needs to be dispatched to help the adventurer, they'll receive that through Service Pro. And then ESB will update back to Salesforce using remote call and through the REST API with any updates for Service Pro as necessary. And they also want adventurers to be able to chat with service coordinators who specialize in specific types of requests. So we'll use digital engagement with chat and then omni-channel skills-based routing here. And then they calculate the number of assistance requests that are at the fault of the tour operator. So this is something we're going to have to track on the tour operator account at the account level, because if there are more than 10 in a given year, the risk level is upgraded. So we can have the risk level be a formula field based on the number of requests that are at fault. And then they would like to be able to track feedback and performance of the service coordinator. So we'll have a case close auto response rule and send a survey. So we'll have to have surveys enabled in the system. Next are some data migration requirements. First, I wanted to go over the data and files archival strategy that we'll use. So as we do archive or LDV data, we'll want to associate data files as well. So from production, we'll be migrating the data using the bulk API 2.0. Files will be migrated using the REST API, and we'll use our ETL for this, and we'll push the data to the AWS data warehouse, and the files will go into S3 buckets where the folder name is the associated record ID for easy matching. So we'll want to extract the files from the content version of the content document link, and then we'll come back in using the bulk API to hard delete the data and the content documents, which will delete the content versions as well for the files. Also, if it is a renewal tour, we're not going to want to delete those records. We're just going to want to keep a copy for reference in our data warehouse. The data migration is as follows. So we have the source systems, which is the tour management system. We also have some spreadsheets. And then when we're ready, we're also going to be migrating the that should be sales orgs, not service. We're going to be migrating the other sales orgs. So the process is to bring the data in from the source system, such as account, contacts, tours, schedules, and bookings into a staging database using our ETL. Here was where we're going to want to do our cleanse, dedupe, standardize, enrich of our data. We can use matching criteria such as first name, last name, zip code, phone, and email. We'll have to consult with our data architect to determine what those rules will be. And then when we're ready, we're going to map and transform the data to a canonical database. We'll also consult with the data architect for how we're going to map and transform the data. This will represent our Salesforce object schema to make it easy for bringing our data into the Salesforce sandboxes, also for sending it to the data warehouse for easy access. We're going to match our children to parents using the external ID, and we want to go through a specific order of load. I'm proposing an iterative load to reduce as much risk to the timeline as possible. So we'll go through a initial data load in a migration window, and then we'll do delta loads in smaller migration windows up to cutover time. So we want to push some of our data to our sandboxes. We'll do a full load to our staging database. We'll do full testing, and then we'll push the data to production, all the data, and we'll want to turn off automations, validations, email alerts, triggers, things like that, because we are going to be pushing data to an existing system, and then we're going to do some smoke test and validation within prod as well. Some accessibility requirements are that the staff require single sign-on. We already went over this. We're going to use Okta for that, and then customers will be using social sign-on. Tour operator coordinators can only view and edit registration requests that have been created for the region. So this will be for using role hierarchy and ownership-based sharing. Tour operators are only able to manage draft tours and schedules. And the tour operators have an office manager who can view data for all the staff. So the tour operator manager will be a delegated admin, and we'll have a sharing set on the tour where the user account equals the tour operator to give visibility on records associated to that account. Draft tours and their schedules are only visible to the AS by region. So published tours and their schedules are visible to all users. So we'll have criteria-based sharing with a rule for the regional rule, and then published tours will be criteria-based sharing. We'll share that with the CEO and subordinates so that the data is visible to everyone in the hierarchy. Internal users can view all adventurers and their tour bookings. So we'll have criteria-based sharing where the account type equals person, criteria-based sharing with the CEO and subordinates once again to share through the whole hierarchy, and then order will be controlled by parents. So that will be the tour bookings. So that visibility will be implicit. Only the tour operators can view and edit the number of fatalities and injuries for the tour operators. We'll use field level security. We'll have a custom field on the account. And then adventure specialists can view all the tour operator registrations and requests in their region, except there are some that are noted as high risk, which only AS is trained to manage the high risk tours in that region can view them, so we can have a different role for them. And this will be ownership-based sharing on the regional roles, as well as the role for the high risk. Adventurers can only view their own contact information or tour bookings and assistance requests. So this will be through Experience site. They get default access for their contact record. Orders will be controlled by parents, so they'll have visibility to their bookings, and then we'll have a sharing set on the case for the user.contact equals the case.contact. The tour guides can only view the details of tour operators 6 months prior to the scheduled tour. So this is where we're going to need advanced sharing for the tour guides. We'll use Apex sharing and scheduled batch Apex to open up that visibility once it's 6 months prior to share the account records for the tour, for the tour operators, or for the tours. Yeah, the tour operators. And then lastly, we have the service coordinators, and the managers should only be able to view the adventure assistance request assigned to that service coordinator. So this will be role hierarchy, ownership-based sharing on case, which will then share up the hierarchy to their managers. Some reporting requirements are the adventurers need to be able to view a history of their travel for the past 2 years. So since we are going to be archiving these tours, I'm thinking that maybe 60 days after the tour has ended, we want to archive the data. We'll have to have a Lightning Web component running Apex without sharing to query their current bookings, as well as any data from the external object, and bring it back into one report, one view. The tour operator coordinators require dashboard and reports of travel schedules for the past 2 years. They can use Tableau CRM that can connect to multiple data sources, including the data warehouse for archived tours and schedules. Tour operators require a report for upcoming tours and schedules and bookings. So this will be a list view for their tours and schedules, and we'll have to have a sharing set on the order for the tour operator, have a lookup for the tour operator to share to them. Office managers of tour operators require a report of their staff's draft tours and their schedules. So since they have Customer Community Plus, they'll have delegated admin and can run a report and see all the data for their account. And then Global Adventure Tours Management requires a dashboard showing a summary of travel booking trends for the past 7 years. So this is better suited for Tableau CRM for historical trending and multiple data sources, since we have a lot of data archived to our data warehouse. Next, we'll get into some governance requirements. So it mentions that they run in 2 IT divisions. So there's an external facing division, and then which is internal facing, which is employee, and external facing, which is customer applications. So there is going to have to be collaboration between the 2 divisions. So we'll have to rely on our PMO office. It does mention that there's a shared services group, which is supported by security and PMO. So we do have security as part of our technical part of our governance body, and the PMO office is part of the business. And then it mentions that both divisions are headed by the respective CIO. So I'm assuming here our CIO is going to be our executive sponsor. We're going to have a steering committee with different representatives from the different parts of the business, so to make sure everyone's equally represented. And then it mentions that there's major changes to its application restricted to only once a quarter. So we're going to have to make sure that we're aligning to these timelines. And this is going to have to we're going to have to use more of a waterfall approach for these more rigid timelines. So I'm proposing a hybrid project management, such as Agile, which would be Agile and Waterfall. For managing the work, we could do some of the work on platform and an Agile approach within these timelines. Then we have these specific timelines for changes that we're going to have to meet. There's also separate teams that are managing critical fixes versus new development. So I would propose that different teams are going to be responsible for both development and fixes, since they'll be more familiar with the code that they're making the fixes for. I wouldn't recommend having 2 separate teams for this. And then we'll have them working on the same Git repo, where they're going to work. We're going to be able to version the code and also alleviate them overwriting each other's code. So this will help to it mentions that some fixes get regressed during our deployment. So this is going to help us to not regress fixes, and we won't lose any changes. It's going to version and keep track of all of our code. So it also mentions that Payment Force is a critical system where they need rigorous testing. So this is where we're going to need a lot of QA support here. It can take multiple weeks, even for the integration point. So we're going to have to really keep track of the testing timelines and the testing cycles. So this is where we're going to have QA and release management as part of our governance body to help oversee that. We also are going to have all developers go through the normal development process in order to make sure we're adhering to global standards. So all the developers will use VS Code with SFDX plugins. We can set up PMD to run with rules to make sure their code is adhering to the rules that the architecture review board sets, and then ESLint for code quality for the Lightning Web Components. For testing, they can use Apex unit tests and Jest tests, as well as mocks and stubs to test against any API endpoints that aren't ready. And then SonarQube for static code analysis. They'll be developing in dev orgs. They'll be creating feature branches off of the develop branch. And then they'll be performing daily commits to make sure their code is staying up to date. And then when they're ready, they'll submit a pull request for a code review, where another developer will review their code and make sure the business requirements are being the business requirements are being met in the code. And then once that person feels the code is ready, they can actually submit requests to the developers in an iterative fashion for the developers to make any changes. And then once they feel the code is ready, they'll merge that code into the develop branch, which will kick off a job to push through Jenkins CI/CD, which will run automated builds, Apex tests, and auto deployment, so that it will be deployed to the dev integration box, which is Dev Pro Sandbox. If there are any issues, like the build failed, Jenkins will notify the developer so they can go back and remedy the issues. But once it's pushed to the Dev Pro box, we'll be running and we'll be integrating the code and then smoke testing the build, and we can do some regression testing here to make sure nothing is broken with other functionality. Then when we're ready, the code will get pushed to the QA environment, which is a Dev Pro Sandbox. We can have functional testing using Selenium, manual test scripts that are run by QA, and regression testing as well. When it's ready for business, it will go to user acceptance testing, where the business users can log in and they can make sure that the requirements are being met and are up to their expectations. We can also set up functional testing using Selenium here as well. And the functional testing is also going to help us to prevent bugs making it to higher environments from the lower environments. So we have multiple levels of testing in our setup. And then once we're ready, we can push everything to staging. This is where we're going to do data migration testing and integration testing. We can also use Load Runner for performance testing, where you want to open a case with Salesforce about 2 weeks before, and then we can also set up functional testing with Selenium. This will be our full sandbox. Then when we're ready, everything will go to prod, and we'll run smoke testing there. When necessary, we can create hotfixes in a Dev Pro box, and we'll have to create a hotfix branch off of master. We'll branch off of master, and then we'll test in the hotfix box, and once it's ready for production, we'll merge that into master, and then we'll also have to merge any hot fixes back into the develop branch. And also the develop branch will be, every time we're ready to do a new release, the develop branch will be branched from master. And let's see what the other requirements here. So that was part of their, they wanted to reevaluate their environment and config management. So this is what I'm proposing. And also I did mention we can use Flowsum for deploying metadata between environments, which will help. That can be overseen by our release management as part of our COE. We also want to make use of Jira for our backlog, and in order to prioritize the requirements, create stories, and then track deliverables. But it does mention that there's also SLAs that need to be met because of outages, and they want to bring Salesforce in to be part of that process. So this is where I'm proposing that we can use a backup restore tool such as Autosave to make sure that if anything does happen, they can still be operational. We do also want to back up our data when we are going to production in existing production environment. So in case anything does happen with our data migration, we have a full backup of that data so we can restore it if necessary. And on a product like that will help with restoring everything to its previous state. And also it can help us operate offline due to these SLAs. And if there are any issues, such as if Salesforce goes down, which doesn't happen too often, but it does, as we know. And then mentions due to hiring restrictions, they rely heavily on individual contractors and system integrators. There's been a history of bad deliverables, so there needs to be a lot of coordination between all teams, external and internal. This will be done through the PMO office and also through project management. And the program owner is going to be overseeing everything. So they're responsible for all the different work streams and making sure everyone's working together and adhering to the same timelines to make sure deliverables are being met. Also, it mentions that since they do want to standardize the global processes, business leaders need to sign off on these new processes before they get implemented. So we'll want to have to go through a sign-off process first with change review from the business, and then they'll get pushed to the architecture review board to make sure everything's feasible architecturally and technically. And then when they do decide that something can actually be signed off on, it's going to make it to the backlog to be brought in to the process. They also can use Confluence for documentation of global processes and standards, and also for documenting APIs. So another big part of this is that they mentioned that the US is a big revenue stream, and that there's been a lot of pressure from the US regional managers to deliver their requirements first. It's caused a lot of frictions and escalations. What we need to do is help them understand that a regional rollout to the area with the biggest impact will be of benefit. We want to get the highest value from our first phase rollout as possible, and we'll also make it easier for subsequent rollouts to the other regions. So we'll take the phased MVP approach by region, starting with the US, and so we do want to try to make sure that those escalations are being resolved, and that everyone's on the same page and working together cohesively for a successful project. And that is the end of my presentation, and more than happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Are we going straight into QA?
You'd like to?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Depends on the other judges.
I might go get another thing of water. I've been talking a lot. I'll be
have...
back.
Okay.
How many people have got questions?
I've got questions, but yeah, I don't know. Like, do you want to organize the questions? Do you have any critical points?
I have some questions on email services, authorization for payment force, integration method with payment force, a couple of things around the data model, and a little bit around the governance and sandbox management. So I've got a selection.
Yeah, I've got a few things on data models, so maybe we can start there. It's always important to understand how that supports the solution. So
sounds good.
is it just the two of us, Matt, judging, or do we have one more judge?
Oh, I'm not judging. I'm just asking questions.
Okay.
But does anybody else have any questions that they want to? Well, I mean, maybe once me and Martin have fired a couple. If you haven't seen these before, you may have a question. You may get a feel for what the nature of the questions are.
Did she share artifacts link that I can look at all the artifacts?
I don't
think she shared those, so we'll have to ask to navigate, I guess, on the screen. I was going to take screenshots as it was going on, but I missed the opportunity.
It was too fast.
I'm still out of breath.
I'm back.
Perfect.
I'm just gonna practice passing on questions, so I'm just gonna pass them all.
If you wish. Or more.
You're going to take the fifth on any question. Is that
Yeah.
what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm just
Okay.
gonna pass, exactly. You can ask whatever you want, just not gonna answer it.
Well, if you're unsure, Melissa, my advice is, obviously mobile browser solves most mobile requirements.
I know, it does.
It doesn't get you any points though.
No,
Melissa, do you have a Google link that we can look at the artifacts?
sure, yeah.
Can you post it in the Zoom chat if you don't mind?
Yeah, you're gonna have to request access because I can't get that link to work where it's anyone with the link can view. I don't know why, but my Google Drive is weird. I've tried to find it. I saw it one time and now I can't find it again. So I have no idea where it is. Let's see. Do I have?
Right. Should we get the timer on?
Yeah, I have it.
44 or 40?
44 and something. 44 is good.
Because you finished earlier, yeah? So you want to.
Yeah.
I see. Okay, you can start it.
Hold on, let me just share the artifacts. But you're gonna have to request access because, like I said, I can't get this to work for anyone with the link. Let me just respond to any requests first.
And then I think if Martin and I at least were just chatting while you were getting a break, so maybe if we could sort of try and group questions around, data model and landscape, and you can put it up on the screen at the same time.
Sure.
Be good enough for me at least.
Okay. I just gave access to everybody.
Nice golden hoodie.
Yep.
All right, let's get the timer on and let's get started. So can you go to data model, please?
Sure.
So I wanted to ask first question around leads. So you seem to have two owners there, DOC and AS.
Yep.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure.
How is the handover happening? Or
Yeah, so it is back in the tour operator management section. So it's determined if they are, it says a registration score is calculated where we're going to use Einstein lead scoring. And if the score is greater than 50, this is when an adventure specialist needs to be notified to perform a local visit. So this is why I'm proposing that we change ownership to the adventure specialist. We also could just use manual sharing to share to them, but and we could just send them a notification. Oh no, sorry. Well, it does have to be assigned because I'm using omni-channel skills-based routing here to assign to specific queues.
so if I remember correctly, so initially as the lead arrives, it will be owned by TOC, and then based on the lead scoring, it will be reassigned, yeah? To
Yeah.
AS.
Yep, using omni-channel.
Based on which requirement are you reassigning the ownership?
If the resulting score is greater than 50, this here.
They just need to be notified.
Yeah, well, but it says that in AS that is skilled and then based on capacity. So this is, we're going to use omni-channel. So I believe when they pull it off from omni-channel, when it's assigned to a specific queue, and or actually it starts with a queue, but as we know, skills based doesn't actually use the queue. It then assigns based on skills, and then they'll be the owner when they take it from the from when it's assigned to them through omni-channel.
Right, but then later on you are using approval process, right? I think there was yeah, Salesforce One mobile action, quick action.
Yep, so they'll then be on site. They'll be working on this lead, and then they're going to approve or reject. And then if they approve, that's when the lead conversion happens.
Who is submitting it for approval? Where is I don't think you described how is it submitted.
So that one's not the approval. That's not using approvals. That's actually just clicking like approve or reject. It's after that, there's then it gets, once they click approve, then it gets submitted for approval to the regional manager. That's right here. That's where the approval process kicks in. They have to actually click approve first, then it goes to the regional manager.
So when you say click approve, they technically click submit for approval.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't submitted for approval before, was it?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And if I understand correctly, so you are using omni-channel. So who is gonna? So that's for AS. So how is your licensing matching up?
They will have Sales Cloud with digital engagement and omni-channel. So I didn't put digital engagement there. They need digital engagement in order to use omni-channel. This should be DE.
And are you using also round robin?
That is for the initial assignment to the tour operator coordinator. That's round robin. It's a multi-step process. First, it's round robin to the tour operator coordinator. Then if they need an on-site visit, it's the adventure specialist.
Can round robin not handle omni-channel assignment for you?
It's not going to be using omni-channel at that point. Are you asking if omni-channel can support round robin, if we want to use omni-channel there as well?
It seems like, yeah, you're purchasing external application plus you're purchasing digital engagement licenses in order to have omni-channel.
Yep.
So can you not have just one application doing both?
We'd have to set up the round robin with our lead assignment rules, which could get kind of complex if we need to scale with multiple regions and multiple tour operator coordinators. So we could just do that ourselves, but if we want to be able to scale better, I think it would be best to use an App Exchange app. Because if the round robin can assign to the different queues, which then we can use omni-channel for that. But it's for that initial assigning to the queues, like the lead assignment, that we're going to use it for.
So my question was about round robin, whether it can do what omni-channel does for you.
Yeah, I suppose we could implement a round robin type of assignment using omni-channel and just use omni-channel for that. So then we'd have to give our tour operator coordinators digital engagement with omni-channel as well. Does that answer your question?
No, but we can move on.
Okay.
Okay, so I had a general question or a clarification. So regions are very significant in the business. So they're obviously moving from multiple systems to a consolidated system, consolidated org you've proposed. Can you just clarify how you control region within the data model?
We would want to have different record types and page layouts for different regions. So maybe they need to see different fields for the different regions. We can support using page layouts and record types, different pick lists with different values for the different regions to support their differing processes.
Okay. And how would you know if what region a particular record belonged to?
We can set it. Let's see. We can set the currency on the record. I suppose we could go off of the currency we're using.
Which object would you choose for that?
What do you mean? We can set the currency on any record.
So in terms of when a record arrives, how would you know what region, when records are created, how would you know which region that was for? So for example, for the
we would have to
tours,
go
for the
off of
league.
like, sorry, we'd have to go off like their country. So if we get information such as their country, we could key off of that.
Would you be capturing that within the lead initially or elsewhere?
So lead would be for the tour operator coordinator. Absolutely. Yeah, we need to know their country up front. For the orders, we'd also be capturing their country as well.
Okay, and then in terms of the sharing and visibility, is there any implications there around who sees what, you know, particularly with respect to customers, to external users?
Yeah, so the role hierarchy would be set up in different regions, and the ownership would be based on the region, and then it would be shared for those different specific roles in the role hierarchy for the different regions.
So the owner of the record would be inferring the region to which the record applies.
Sharing roles.
And then in terms of the users, how would you define which region a user belonged to?
We can set the region on the user record.
Is that a standard field, or would you add a custom field for that?
I believe that's standard. We can set the locale, the time zone. Those are all standard on the user.
Okay, and if there was somebody who's perhaps based in Europe who's maintaining North American data because of remote working?
So we would have to share to them so that they can also see the data. So what would they be working on specifically, like cases or accounts or cases?
Yeah,
we have global, so that they have their own visibility outside of the regional hierarchy.
So in terms of tours and orders, for example?
So order, okay, so I have systems owner there. So that's going to be controlled by parent with the account. So there's going to be specific account owners. So if we do need to bring someone in, we could also use account teams to bring other people in to collaborate. Say if there's someone in the US that's working on an account and they need someone from the UK, they could add them to the account team.
Okay, thanks.
I would like to ask you about how do you model the attendees of your tours?
The what? The attendees?
Mm-hmm.
That's through the order.
So order is representing people?
It's their booking, yeah. So it has a lookup to the person account for who's booking.
So if a tour guide needs to see who is attending their tours, they will be looking at the orders?
So it's gonna have a lookup to the tour operator account, but not the tour guide. So we do have a sharing requirement for them to see the tour operators, but if we need to see them, give them the attendee list, we could just, we could do Lightning Web Component, Apex without sharing, or we can use Apex sharing to give them visibility to who's attending that tour, like the contact names.
So there was a requirement about the tour schedule when it's in a draft phase, and then when it's published, it needs to become visible.
Yep.
How do you manage the visibility to be conditional?
Criteria-based sharing rule. And which we do have to keep in mind the limits on the number of criteria-based sharing rules per object. If we did feel we were going to run into that limit, we could then use Apex sharing.
So who you are sharing with? Who is your target group for the sharing?
It is actually the CEO and subordinates when they're published, so that it gets shared to the entire hierarchy.
But don't you need to share it to customers?
Nope, I'm not sharing to customers. I'm giving them a custom search using Lightning Web Component and Apex. Basically a custom ordering flow component so that they can see all the tours and then select which one they want, and then they create their order against that.
So it will be shared only internally through sharing rule.
Yes.
Gotcha. Thank you. Matt, over to you.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if my question is exactly the same, so forgive me if we're going back over it again. So on page 5 in the accessibility requirements, the second to last bullet, so tour guides can only view the details of tour operators 6 months prior to scheduled tours.
Yep.
So I think when you were doing the walkthrough of that, you had talked about using Apex sharing to accomplish that, and then you had suggested there was some kind of automation that would update those records at the appropriate time. Did I understand that right? And if
Yes.
I did, could you just give a little bit more specific detail about how you would see that working?
Sure. So you could have a scheduled batch Apex job that runs every day. It's going to check the date of the scheduled tour. And then once it's 6 months prior, it will then share the details of the tour operators with the tour guides that are scheduled for that tour. It will be based on the date.
Okay, and so is it creating the sharing records?
It's creating, sorry, yes, it's creating a share record for in the account share for the tour guide.
Okay, and in the event that, for example, the owner of the record changes.
Yeah, we'll lose that sharing. So it's going to be a manual share since we can't have Apex sharing reasons on the account. So we'd have to recreate that sharing. We'd have to keep track of it.
Okay, and you would keep track of it in the same way as or a different way?
We'd have to probably have our own like sharing object where we keep track of what was shared to who, and if ownership changes, we'll have to requery that and then create the sharing records over again.
How would you do that? How would you make sure that this happens in timely fashion?
Can you explain that more?
So you answered that you would have to query the share records that were there before they were wiped out by the ownership change. So how do you do that technically?
We could use a before trigger or before save flow before when the ownership changes.
Which one?
Before save, or which one would I use?
You gave me two options. Flow.
Sure.
Can you just,
I'll go
yeah.
with a before save flow.
So I had another question around customization. I didn't get the bullet, sorry, but there's a requirement around email attachments as part of inquiries, and you mentioned using email services.
Yeah.
To do that, could you add a little bit more detail about that one, specifically how you would implement it?
Sure. So we'd write an Apex email service. So I think the easiest way to do this would be to send a request from the lead record that will contain the lead ID, so that when the applicants respond with the required documentation, it will come in as through an inbound email message, and then the attachments will get parsed off the email, and then we can easily save those attachments to the lead record, which is the application.
And how would you locate the appropriate lead record?
Because the record ID will be included in the original email. So it would know from having that record ID in the email.
Okay, so you'd rely on having a token and that still being there.
Yes, that's why. So it would be the easiest to send the request from the lead record, where we could insert the record ID.
Yep. Okay, thanks.
I wanted to ask about your map component. So you mentioned that you will be using iframe.
Yep.
Can you explain a little bit more why do we need iframe for the map component?
Because apparently Google Maps won't work in a Lightning Web Component, so you need to iframe it. Or you can use Visual Force, but I would prefer using Lightning Web Component since it's the newer technology, and we'll just have to use an iframe.
So if I understand correctly, like you would want to be using the Google Maps API.
Yes.
So can you not query the data from the Lightning Web component?
To display the map? From what I know very recently is Google Maps doesn't work in Lightning Web Components, and you need to use an iframe to get it to work. I could be wrong there, but that's what I know as of a few days ago, before I even worked on this scenario. Because it wasn't a different one. Anyways, it's so if there, please let me know if I'm wrong.
Is
That's my
iframing
understanding too. It doesn't work directly, and you have to do a couple of workarounds.
Or
is
you
the
use
iframing,
or you use the Visual Force page. You can, there's two options: Visual Force page or iframe. Visual Force page within a Lightning Web Component, Visual Force page, or iframe within a Lightning Web Component.
There you go. As far as I understand, Visual Force is still required to do those unless that's changed, but it may have changed in the last year.
is there any license implication on that?
For what?
For the Google service?
I don't believe so.
It's free?
I believe so. Yep. I've set that up without any licensing.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question on the integrations, specifically to Payment Force.
Sure.
And I think this was mentioned on page 3. Well, first of all, clarification, because when you went through that requirement the first time, you talked about a fire and forget pattern.
Yep.
And I believe that you then revised that a little bit later on. So
Yep.
could you just take me back through that again?
Sure.
With the preferred approach.
Yes, so I wasn't reading what I had written. So it has to be a request for response, so we can have a flow with an external service. Let's see. Yeah, so let's see. The process is the AS has completed their review, and then the creditor's account needs to be debited in Payment Force with the amount that is set regionally. So we'd have Salesforce make a request through the ESB. The ESB can surface the API endpoint for Payment Force for us to just call the ESB. So it will be a request reply pattern, because which is synchronous. So we need an immediate response to the user. The payment was successfully debited, and if not, the user needs to know so that if it was successful, we get a confirmation.
Okay, and could you just add a little bit more detail about the role of the ESB in the transaction that you described? So if you could just maybe go end to end from Salesforce all the way back down and back up again, just so that
Sure.
we're clear on.
Oh yeah, so we also need to set up name credentials to call to make the request reply call out. So Salesforce is actually making the call out to the ESB. So this is actually where Salesforce is the client and the ESB would act more as the server. Salesforce makes the request to the ESB, which surfaces this API. So ESB is already connected to the API for Paymentforce. It's just surfacing an endpoint for us to call. Salesforce makes the call to the ESB. The ESB is really like a middleware facilitator of the call to Paymentforce. The call is made to Paymentforce to debit the account. So we're sending parameters to Paymentforce. We're sending this creditor ID and the fee amount that needs to be deducted. So then Paymentforce will try to deduct that amount and then send back a transaction number to the ESB, which will then return it back to Salesforce, which
Okay.
can then be stored.
And so Salesforce, it has one request and then waits for the reply for all of that
Yes,
downstream
it's
activity.
sorry, yes, it's a blocking transaction. So it's
Okay.
synchronous, which will be blocking for the user. So the user will be waiting on a page until they get either confirmation of success or failure.
And you had the call out being initiated from Salesforce using which technology?
Let me see if I have this. So I have a flow that will use an external service. So the external service will be connecting to the ESB. This can be initiated using like a quick action.
And should it be the case that there's a slow response?
Yeah, so if it's
and
a
it
slow
times out?
response, I don't know. So one thing I don't know about external services is if you can set up continuation server. So if it is something that would be slower, I would actually prefer a Lightning Web Component with an Apex controller to use the continuation server for long running call out. It will help with any long running call outs and timeouts.
Thank you.
Question on your mobile strategy. So looking at your landscape, how many apps do you have there? You have the Salesforce mobile app, and what is the other one?
So yeah, I forgot to label it. That's the mobile publisher app.
Okay. And so is it used by the same user?
No, I'm just showing that users are using these apps. I maybe should have just drew two different people.
So which one is for, because they are internal and external, right?
Yeah, the Salesforce one is for internal, mobile publisher is for external. So the mobile publisher app will basically just take our experience site and create a wrapper for it and publish it to our app store. We also have to keep in mind the of the time it's going to take to publish it, and we'll have to get a beta testing link first before it goes live. But I felt that using mobile publisher was faster time to market and lower total cost of ownership than creating a custom app. And I felt it was better than the mobile browser as well, because it did mention, I actually skipped this requirement. It did mention that they should not have to re-enter their credentials. So we'll have a connected app with the refresh token is valid until revoked. And they also can use biometric unlocking of the app so they don't have to keep re-entering their password.
Would you be able to describe the user agent OIDC flow?
Sure. So with OIDC, I believe I have it here. So there's an access token request from the client app, which is the mobile app. It sends the client ID to Salesforce for the authentication endpoint. The response type will be token. So this is the first level of the authentication. So then there'll be a redirect back to the client, which then, so they will be clicking like login with Facebook when they open the app. This will be the first time they're authenticating. So that will cause a redirect to happen back to the OIDC provider that is probably something like Facebook. It makes a request to the authorization endpoint, checks to see if they have an existing session. If they don't, the user needs to authenticate and consent to the scopes. And then once they do that, an authorization code response is sent back using an HTTP redirect. And then the client then uses the callback URL with the auth code that they receive, which is then posted back from Salesforce to the token endpoint for the OIDC provider. It sends the client ID, the client secret, and the authorization code. This is actually, this is a web server flow that is going through here. And then because it's OpenID Connect, they'll get back the access token and the ID token. And once they get the ID token, they have the option of using the user info endpoint with that ID token to receive more information. So suppose in the reg, this is when the reg handler kicks in. So maybe the reg handler needs more information on the user to do some matching. It can make the call back to the user info endpoint. But this is when the consent for the app is then presented to the user. And then the access token is sent back using the callback URL, and then they can use that access token to access the resources of the on the resource server, which is with Salesforce, to use the APIs via the app.
So where is the refresh token you were talking about?
Oh, and then, sorry, I don't have that written here. Then there would be a refresh token returned from, I believe, from Salesforce, because it's going to be used with the connected app. That's a good question, because we need that refresh token so that they don't need to log in again.
And where is the token going to be stored?
On the mobile app, I'm going to pass on that.
Thank you.
Ask 2 questions, please.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Melissa, can you go back to sorry, the adventure support section?
Yeah.
The first requirement, can you walk through from a business process perspective, how do you assign tour guides?
To the tours?
Yeah.
That actually happens further up. So during the tour proposal and scheduling, it's kind of jumbled into this one sentence, but the adventure specialist is assigned to the tour and the schedule. And it mentions there's a user-friendly method for the tour guides to review and update the status of multiple tour requests at once, but that didn't make a lot of sense. My assumption here is that is when the tour guides will get assigned to the tour by the adventure specialist. So we could have some, we had to create some special scheduling component in a Lightning Web Component scheduling component using Apex that will run some logic to find tour guides in that area that have availability.
Where do you set the availability?
That they have we can check to see what they're actually booked against. These are the bookings. For the actual availability, if we need to store that, like you asking like what days and times they work, we'd probably have to have another object to hold that associated to their contact record.
What's your final solution?
Well, I would add another object to hold the actual days and times that they're available to work.
And you built all the custom logic in the LWC page?
Yes.
Can you think of any other alternative?
Oh, like Lightning, such as Lightning Scheduler? Yes, we could use Lightning Scheduler to do the scheduling as well.
Any reason why you didn't propose that and you go with the custom solution?
Because scheduling wasn't a big part of this. It didn't really even mention it. I just kind of extracted that myself from here. But obviously they do need to be scheduled. So I felt like it could be overkill, but it could be useful.
So what do you recommend finally?
I would say it's easier to go with Lightning Scheduler if we need more advanced scheduling capabilities.
What other licensing consideration you can think of?
Yeah, we would have to add. So for the tour guides, actually, I'm trying to think if Customer Community Plus can be assigned using Lightning Scheduler. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, given that you don't know that, what will be your final solution?
What was that if I'm not sure?
Yeah,
I just would go with the custom scheduling solution.
okay, thank you. And go to the data migration requirements, please. And I think third requirement. Data migration.
Yeah.
So what would you propose for 24/7 availability?
Sorry, yeah, this is where a backup solution such as Autosave will help provide 24/7 operation in case there's any downtime during the cutover. So it would be like a copy of the production database that can be used. Beyond that, I don't know the exact details.
Mhm. But that's from the backend perspective. But when you truly think from a tour booking and customer experience perspective, how would you support that? From a business process perspective, how do you support 24/7? Not from a data copying and availability.
Well, this is part of the data requirements. So are you creating that requirement then that they need 24/7 support?
Yeah, let's assume that the company operates globally 24/7. They don't want even 1 minute of downtime because they respect their customers.
You mean for support purposes? That's what I'm trying to ask. I need more clarification on the 24/7 operation you're asking
When I
about.
say support as an adventure, I need to be able to book trip anytime. I
Yes.
don't want.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's provided by the experience site. They can log it in and book whenever they would like.
How are you solving this requirement through Odaseva that this is about making sure the data is migrated and
Yes.
switch influence. So how is it related to Odaseva?
So minimal downtime during cutover. So suppose we need 4 days. I believe they could still operate off their production data while we're pushing this data to the current production. Beyond that, I don't know the specifics, but I believe it does help with that. I know we have an expert on the call that could answer that.
Yeah, it doesn't do that.
It doesn't?
It doesn't.
Does own backup do that?
Which,
No comment.
I know, I
But-
thought one of them does. I thought that was their main selling point during the whole permission gate thing.
are you talking about archiving or backup and restore? Which product are you talking about?
Well, I want to use a backup and restore because we are going to production. And we want to make sure that we're keeping a copy of our data in case anything goes wrong. So if it doesn't provide that capabilities, I know another option is to operate off of a sandbox as a backup while cutting over to production.
Yeah,
And then you have
no third-party solution, as far as I'm aware, has a working front end that goes along with back-end data copies. So if you're looking for user interaction, nobody has that that's actually production ready.
Interesting. So the only option there then is to work off of a sandbox during a cutover, I believe.
Wait, Melissa, this is Q&A, so let's keep the discussion for after, yeah?
Yes, we'll talk about it after. I'm just saying that's what I believe. Other than that, I don't have an answer.
Okay.
On the topic of sandbox management then, and thinking about the data migration requirement a little bit more, in terms of testing data migration, which sandbox do you see that taking place in?
So I have it in multiple sandboxes, so there can be partial loads to QA and UAT where they do some validation and testing there before doing a full load. But the full load will go to staging, and that's where they're going to do their full integration testing. We can have engage a data steward to help make sure records are being related properly and things are working as expected, functionality is working as expected.
Okay. And if functionality is not as expected in that final test in the full sandbox, what are the considerations that you have there about rerunning those tests?
So if testing does not go as planned, that means there could be something that went wrong with the data. So if we're taking data backups, if we're using a data backup tool, we could restore the data to the state that it was previously before that we did the migration, and we could try to identify where the issues are and restore the data, and then run the migration again with any modifications, and then rerun the same tests again. So we could have manual tests, we could have test scripts.
And so your strategy for preparing the full sandbox for to be ready for testing to begin involves other more ETL processes. Is that how you do that?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch it. So the ETL processes for what?
I'm trying to ask the question without giving the answer. How many times can you reset a full sandbox?
Once every 30 days.
And therefore, in order to rerun tests, you would need to.
We would basically need to reseed the sandbox. So I know that you can get around
Right.
the refresh cycle by taking your backups and restoring, and
That's great. Thank you. Yeah.
Since we are talking about environments, I have a quick question on the QA sandbox. If I'm not mistaken, that's a Dev Pro.
yes.
So can you explain to me what is data masking feature?
Oh yeah, I didn't mention Salesforce Data Mask. That will help obfuscate and scramble data within the sandboxes so that when developers are working on the data, they're not seeing any PII or anything that is sensitive data that we might want to hide from them. From what I know, it will like scramble data that's existing data, so it's not actual production data.
So where does the sensitive data come from which environment?
Where does the data come from? Well, when we create the sandbox, we can create it from production.
Okay, and
we also can seed data as part of our ETL process when doing our data migration from this process here. We can
now
push data.
Does DevPro Sandbox receive production data?
You mean copying? No, it doesn't support copying production data, but we can seed data using ETL.
So would you be using data masking in that sandbox?
Actually, we wouldn't need to use it there. Nope, because when we see the data, we can just put test data in there.
So
We'd mostly want to use it for like our full sandbox and partial.
So which environments would you be using data masking in?
I'm going to say UAT and staging.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And one more follow-up on what is the size of the DevPro Sandbox?
I'm going to pass on that.
I just had a quick one around the governance that I'd like to squeeze in. So you had your steerco, if you got that diagram, if you wouldn't mind putting that up. So so if we look down on page 6, down at the bottom there, it talks about the respective CIOs. So is there one CIO or more than one CIO in your reading?
Oh yeah, headed by respective CIO. So there's a CIO for internal and a CIO for external.
So with that being the case, how would that alter how would you deal with that within your governance structure?
I'd probably have to have both of them they both would be in the steering committee. Have to determine who's the actual CIO to be the executive sponsor.
Thank you.
Quickly back to data model again. so you mentioned you didn't find use for opportunities. Can
Right.
you please provide your justification?
Yes, so I usually would justify an opportunity when there's something such as forecasting or quotas or more complex price negotiations. So then when we would want to use something such as quotes. So I didn't feel that this was this had that justification.
So how do you envisage onboarding the tour operators?
It's just through the lead.
And it's just, so you manage the whole sales cycle on lead?
Yep, so they're applying and they're just getting either approved or rejected. So once they're approved, they become an account and a contact. So I didn't really see a sales cycle that would be supported by opportunities here.
I have a quick one on integration, if we can. So on page 4, this relates to the emergency support. So there's an update needing to be sent to the field dispatch system. I
Yeah.
think you said that you propose to use a platform event.
Yes, it
Is
says,
that right?
yep, because it says real time and it doesn't mention that there needs to be a response for the user. So I made the assumption there that we could have near real time. If it does need to be immediate, we could use Salesforce calling an API endpoint
Okay.
to just send it directly.
And given that, well, let me ask it this way: how would the person who was requesting the help know that their request had been received if you were using a platform event?
You mean the person submitting?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they wouldn't know immediately. They wouldn't have an immediate response. There would have to be some asynchronous notification, such as an email saying your request has been received. But if it's immediate and they want it on the screen, we'd have to use request reply.
Okay, thank you.
Have you considered another way of integrating using async